Welcome to SpunTales.com, where we spin tales from around the web. This episode, we continue the story, The Falling, by J.D. Phillips. An advanced copy of The Falling was provided to SpunTales.com with permission to read on air. Be sure to follow her at her socials at facebook.com/authorjd and twitter.com/JD_author. The lights became too bright to bear again as Randall pushed him further from the lobby and the elevator as they entered the main area. The hallway seemed to extend to forever, lined with doors and open desks where women in different colored scrubs sat messing with various papers. Carhartt remained mostly hidden beneath his blanket as Randall left him in order to speak to one of the nurses. Then he glanced toward the hospital map mounted behind glass on the wall beside him, and noticed a pale young man staring back at him. The man moved when he moved, huddled beneath a blanket identical to his own. He frowned in sync with his own frown. It wasn't until he watched the man move to touch the same cheek he was touching, and pushed the blanket away from his head, that he realized the young man was him. This was his face, as everyone else saw it. The dark mop of wavy hair, the full lips, the dark circles beneath the two dark brown eyes that were nearly all pupil above a long sloped nose. This was his face. It blinked and frowned and moved exactly as he commanded it to, and yet, staring at it triggered no feelings of recognition whatsoever. He was younger than Randall and Dunrow, but hardly young enough to be the kid Randall had referred to him as. It wasn't an unpleasant face, he supposed. Decent, as Randall had called it. But there was something troubling about his eyes that went beyond the overblown pupils. Something lurking just out of sight within the black. Something that reminded him. It reminded him of the storm and all those reaching hands that were so desperate to escape. "Must be weird, huh?" he heard Randall say. The shock of Randall's voice, as well as the realization that he'd walked right up beside him without him noticing, shook Carhartt free of his reflection's gaze, and he was grateful for it. Unfortunately, the shock also caused him to jump involuntarily, and a great deal of the hot chocolate he'd been cradling beneath his blanket splashed out of the cup. He was fortunate that most of the still warm liquid ended up absorbed by the blanket, but the amount that landed directly on his lap was unpleasant to say the least. "Well, shit, kid," Randy said. "I thought you'd already drank that." Carhartt looked up at Randall, and then beyond Randall's shoulder just in time to see a nurse at the station place a cup very much like his own to her mouth in order to take a sip. He hadn't even considered doing such a thing with his own cup until this very moment. He'd simply enjoyed cradling it and the warmth therein between his still cold hands. His own little cup of fire, minus the dangers of being burned. "Drinking," he whispered, putting the cup to his mouth just as he'd seen the nurse do. An unexpected sound rose from his throat at the first taste of warm sweetness landing on his tongue. If he'd ever had anything so richly delicious before, he couldn't recall it and instantly regretted having splashed half the chocolate goodness onto his blanket. "I like this," he said. "Yeah? That's good considering now you smell like it," Randy replied through a half smile. "Can we get him another blanket? Maybe a gown too, since we've got him waiting here in the hallway? Hell, he'll probably need some wet wipes or something too." Carhartt was intrigued by the idea of wet wipes and gowns, though his focus remained on the salvaging every last drop of hot chocolate still left inside his cup. Most of the nurses were either giving Randy harsh glares or ignoring him outright, but a fairly young woman with dyed auburn hair and too bright red lipstick decided to hop up and do as he requested. mainly because she'd overheard Ben's talk about Carhartt and was happy for an excuse to move in for a closer look. Randy considered her a good sort. He found her rather attractive as well, but Carhartt didn't think that was overly important. So, like I was saying before your chocolate bath, it must be weird, Randy said once the nurse walked out of sight. You not recognizing yourself, I mean. You didn't, did you? Carhartt finally lowered the cup from his face and shook his head. Is that weird? Randall shrugged. I've never really known anyone outside of TV or video games to actually have amnesia, but it happens, I guess. Is that a bad thing? Randy shrugged again. I don't know. Most people avoid looking themselves in the mirror because they know their faces too well. Some might welcome a blank slate. Carhartt furrowed his brow, fairly certain Randall was speaking about himself more than anyone else. Now that Randy had been somewhat used to the strangeness of the man who'd named himself after a jacket, he had inadvertently lowered his guard somewhat. Behind the grumpy face and soft gruff tones was an infinite stream of sadness. You'd forget your life? Carhartt asked. Randall laughed sharply, raised his defenses again, and shook his head. If 15 years as an alcoholic has taught me anything, it's that it's not really possible. Come on, let's go get you into the bathroom before the chocolate glues your ass to the seat. Carhartt nodded automatically, though he failed to see how the chocolate he drank could be capable of such a thing. He stared with interest into the open rooms as they passed by. Randy pushed the chair further down the hall and around the corner. Labs, offices. He didn't have time to get a good look at anything, really, but that which made him uneasy earlier was less pressing in this area, and therefore preferable. He was totally at ease when Randall was pushing him up to a wooden door with a large blue plaque nailed to its upper center. Restroom was printed in thick white letters along the top, while people-shaped figures stood directly below. He stared at the sign for several seconds while Randy looked to see if the Auburn nurse had returned yet. Unable to understand exactly what the plaque was getting at, when neither figure appeared to be resting. Sorry it took so long, he heard the Auburn nurse say from behind. I got sidetracked by a phone call. Get this. Dr. Dunrow went home unexpectedly, but she still wants us to get those tests done. Randall gave Carhartt a sideways glance upon hearing the news. Dunrow went home? Yeah, crazy, right? I guess that old battle axe is human after all. Sorry, I probably shouldn't have said that. Randall waved away her apology. I'm Rita, by the way, the nurse said. You? Oh, Randy. I'm Randy. And this is our miracle patient, huh? Carhartt was aware that she was referring to him, but he didn't feel like any miracle. She was so bright, so eager, excited even. It almost made him as uneasy as whatever he'd sensed before. Still, it was obvious Randall liked her well enough to smooth his hair back and attempt to smile, so Carhartt tried to overlook it. Hello, he told her, craning his neck in order to steal a glance at her. Rita smiled even wider, and quickly moved on ahead in order to hold the bathroom door open for Randy to push the chair through. She was juggling a pile of various linens and things under her arm all the while. The restroom was not what Carhartt had expected. The entire room was done in shades of beige and mauve. The floors and the walls consisted of different types of tile, the tiny rows interrupted by a couple of metal stalls and toilets. To the right of the door was a countertop fitted with 2 sinks, soap dispensers, and paper towels. Randy pushed him to the counter, where a large mirror was hanging above it, while Rita stepped outside to fetch a clean wheelchair she'd found unattended in one of the hallways during her search for linens. Randy left Carhartt alone in front of the mirror while he went to hold the door open for Rita and the new chair. His heart lurched the instant Randall stepped away. An overreaction for sure, but rationalization did little good. He could feel eyes upon him and knew without looking it had to do with the mirror. His reflection. Something that existed beyond his reflection on the other side of the looking glass. Something waiting for one tiny crack to form, so it may ooze its way over to this side of life. Be sure to follow us at facebook.com/SpunTales and twitter.com/SpunTales. SpunTales is a Heathen Digital podcast. If you'd like your podcast read through the Heathen Digital Network, contact us at info@heathendigital.com or visit our website, heathendigital.com. If you're an author and you'd like your story read on air, contact us at info@spuntales.com. Thanks for listening.